Well, Martha certainly is talking about the person that I knew and loved too. And I just want to say a few words. I didn't know quite how to cut this to 10 minutes, but about David as a colleague and David as a dear friend. So David, I really got to know David well when he came to the center. He and Gary had known each other. I know that he loved Gary. I loved Gary too, so we had that in common. He was a terrific colleague, a pain in the ass. I mean, he just. I think of who was David, what made him so special, and the things that came to mind were that he was irreverent. He had an eye for the phony, and he despised self-aggrandizement. And he had those characteristics while at the same time being unbelievably smart, the best grades, the best school. He could have done anything, and he chose what he chose. And he did it without the least bit of self-aggrandizement, which sometimes can be, oh, I care so much about the poor. And then it becomes so important that you care about the poor as opposed to doing anything. David knew who he was. He was a guy who had a fair amount of privilege, some troubles in his life, as many of us do, but in the main privilege, chose what he chose, knew that he wasn't poor, but he wanted to help people who didn't have what he had. He was very much like Gary in that sense. Gary would say to me, just because I'm anti-poverty doesn't mean I have to be poor. We both recognized that it was a privilege to work here at Harvard Law School, to have secure positions and to have the support of dean after dean after dean around a community-based law center that was its own little school. David was inherently a critic and to some extent a skeptic. And he was Jewish. It was very important, his Judaism to him, as it was to Gary. I think at best he might have been a deist. I don't know what his view of the divine would be, but the ethic of making the world a better place, of mending the world, was something he lived by, and that was something that was very real for Gary as well. And he puzzled over me as a Jewish convert. So David didn't hesitate to criticize anyone. I was nominally his boss. He criticized everything I wrote. Wasn't clear enough, wrote it, and when I did something that I said, not bad, you know, that last piece you wrote, that was really pretty good. I would walk into his office, and he not only was a great lawyer, he could parse law, he could argue law, but I would walk in and I would be surprised with sports quizzes. He's a sports nut. And one time I walked in and I had something important to tell him about a case we were working on, and he said to me, okay, quick, name the lifetime combined batting average of the Alou brothers. And I was like, are you kidding? You are working for a woman who knows the names of the Alou brothers, Felipe, Matty, and Jesus, and you want me to know their combined batting averages? You're out of your mind. We went to a baseball game together with my son, my youngest, and one of his friends, and it was a night when Roger Clemens was pitching. David hadn't quite gotten the 4 seats that I and some others had in a consortium. He eventually owned those seats. And Roger Clemens was pitching, and there was a complicated double switch. We were playing a National League team, and when we were riding home, the baseball announcers misstated the complexities of the double switch. And David was enraged, and he got on the phone in the car and called up the station and said, you guys get paid to get this right. So what's with you? So that was my colleague, my dear colleague, David. I was a housing nut too, spent a lot of time doing housing. And David joined Duncan and I as teaching housing law and policy. And a major theme was that you're not just helping the person you serve when you work in a targeted way on housing, because there are neighborhood effects. So you can help the people you don't serve if you hit that threshold. So he was smart, committed. I want to say something about David as a friend. David was not a sentimental person. He was not touchy-feely. I think he despised all things New Age, except maybe drugs now and then. I don't know if that's New Age. And he was not touchy-feely. He never came over with accidentally touching your arm. But when he was comforting you or was happy to see you, he would walk up and he would just throw his arms around you in this big hug, and then he would let go. And he would have something to say. He drove Gary's car home to my house the day that Gary died. He walked in the door, and I got one of those incredible hugs. He spoke about Gary at his funeral in a way that only someone who really knew Gary and understood him as a person as well as a teacher and a lawyer could have done. He came to the Cape after Gary's transplant and played basketball with David down on the courts. There's a little basketball court in Wellfleet. And the night before Gary died, we were with our rabbi at a meeting at his house, and we were left. And that night, Gary got in the car, and he was very agitated, and he said, "This is the year David's going to be bar mitzvahed, and it's not going to happen unless you do it. You've got to make it happen. It has to happen." So I said, okay, I'll do it. And David, I don't know if I ever told him this story, tutored my David through his bar mitzvah, met with him, made it interesting, made it fun, stood behind him in his at his bar mitzvah, and I don't know that it would have happened without David, but that's the kind of friend he was. There was never an issue about time. It was just, I love you, I'll do this, and we loved him back. My extended family came to love him in the same way, and I knew that was so when my son-in-law asked David to eulogize my daughter when she died. And David I know we went through, he says, I didn't know Courtney that well, but he did it. So this is David, the rabbi. He thought about being a rabbi. He brought those principles of giving and caring from the heart, really from the heart, and never fronting the way some clergy do, some kind of position better than the rest of us. It was just who he was. It was how he lived his life. And at the heart of his life was, the things he cared about, but it was this family right here, particularly his children. He couldn't talk about you enough. He couldn't have loved you more. He couldn't have loved Stacy more. And we were privileged and are privileged, my family, to be very close to yours. Thank you.